Satnam, yogis and yoginis, hello and welcome now. So today is a historical perspective on the mind, and so let's go into that. As we go back and if we look at the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita being the jewel of the Mahabharata, the epic battle, and that's where Arjuna receives his teachings from Krishna, and a lot of that is about the teachings of yoga. Yeah, what Krishna is telling Arjuna is these are the teachings of yoga. This is the approach of yoga, and he expounds on the idea of consciousness as a universal consciousness, and we needing to do a certain path towards getting to our understanding that we are part of that consciousness. So there is a lot of talk about consciousness. There is a talk about Atman, about the soul, and how we are part of everything. Everything. The Bhagavad Gita can be understood in many ways as well. Like all these teachings can be read in a number of ways, but it's more centered about this, about the soul, about consciousness, about God, and our getting to understand that we are part of this one. There is not a specific description of what the mind is, what the ego is. There is not a detailed description of these things, but it's more like an abstract, more in the general terms, let's say. There is some quote here. Oh, it's a bit higher up. So, yeah, here it is. For one who has conquered the mind is the best of friends, but for one who has failed to do so, his mind will be the greatest enemy. This is chapter 6, verse 6. So this is like the most reference that the Gita does to the mind. Yeah, it doesn't go any deeper. It just says, look, it can be your friend or it can be your enemy. There is a number of places where you can find stories like saying, when the soul wanted to incarnate, not like that. When God said to the soul, said, "Okay, it's now for you time to reincarnate," and the soul is like, "Oh no, you're gonna. I don't want to go there. It's gonna be difficult. It's gonna be challenging. I'm gonna feel separated from you. So why should I go there?" And God, come on, this is your opportunity. You need to learn. You need to grow. You need to find out, develop your consciousness and the mind. But I don't want to forget about you. Like, how am I going to do it to connect back to you? And so the God gives to the soul, gives the mind. So the mind is a tool that is given to us to connect back to God. Yeah, this is just like a little story to say, look, the mind can be useful, the mind can be helpful, the mind can be a tool, it can be an instrument. In fact, we will see later on as we approach we are starting from the Gita, but as we are approaching closer to Vedanta, we will see the mind is called Antakarana, and that's the inner instrument. So it is an instrument, and as an instrument, it can be used for good and evil. It can be, like a knife can be used to cut your vegetables to eat, or it can be to stab someone, right? So mind by itself is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with mind itself, but it can be your best of friends, it can be your worst of enemies. So this is basically the Bhagavad Gita's perspective. As we are moving on in time, Bhagavad Gita, we don't really know exactly when was it written, but we could say it's around 200 before Christ, or 0 or 200 after, more or less. And so as we are moving on, the next stage would be the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras is a very, very specific scientific step-by-step development on how to get to liberation. Maybe we'll do some Yoga Sutras course in the future. I'm thinking, that would be a nice thing to do in the future. We are in the mind right now. But the Yoga Sutras, it talks about how the mind is colored, how our perception of the world is filtered through, like these windows, like in the churches, they have these windows with all these colors. How is it called? Like, I always forget about the name for this. Stained glass, yeah. So there is like red and green and blue, and the light filters through it with many colors. So in the same way, when we look at the world, filtered through our mind, we see all these colors, and we have our own perspective of what we like, what we dislike. So This is a lot about the ego, yeah? We were talking about the development of the ego from the Western perspective, how if initially all our concerns when we were babies is about survival, and then the ego, sorry, the mind is telling us this is dangerous, beware, just step back. Oh, this is good for your, for you need to feed, so you need that, so or you need to rest, so that's good for you, or you want to entertain yourself, you want to learn something, you're curious, so you're attracted towards something. So you would be attracted towards food and things like that, and you would be rejecting something that is dangerous. And that pulling forward or pulling away is the initial, this pulling that becomes this I like or I dislike. It's not the same when you're a baby. It's more like, should I be careful with that, or am I curious about that? But that slowly transforms into our ego's preferences of what we like and what we dislike. So, so that would be the role of the ego. But what happens is that because we have created all these out of our experiences in life, we will see a little bit more about this later on, then we have our own beliefs and our own values, and the things that we like and we dislike are associated to this belief and this value. So when we look at the world, filtered through the stained glass, we decide, this is good, this is not good. And the judgment of something that is good or not good, or good or evil, this is something that the mind does. Nothing by itself is necessarily good or evil, though there are karmic consequences to the actions that we do. So in a way, when you read the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali is telling us, look, your mind has been afflicted by this coloring, and now you are perceiving the world through this window, and it's not really real. If you want to find your reality, your real self, then there is a path that we have to do to get there. So this would be Patanjali's approach. And regarding the morality of our actions on the way to go there, we could say that there is a moral aspect to the Yoga Sutras in terms of when you look at the eight limbs of yoga, like the yamas and the niyamas, the first two aspects. You could say there is a moral component to that, like saying ahimsa, don't harm others, right? Nor yourself either. Asteya, don't steal. But if you look at it also in another way, Patanjali is just telling us, look, if you steal from someone, you're creating karma. Do you want to be liberated? So don't create any more karma. The first step towards liberating yourself from your karma is to not create any more. Right? Don't put any more wood to the fire. Before even trying to put the fire out, then just don't add any more wood. So that would be saying, look, the yamas and the niyamas are there so that you don't add any more wood to the fire. So, and then we have to go and purify the mind, right? But it's like the first steps would be like, don't add any more wood. And you could read it like that. This is a very practical way. It's just look, practice ahimsa, practice asteya, practice brahmacharya, practice these things, and you're going to be on your way towards the liberation. It's not something like, look, this is the right thing to do, this is the moral thing to do, you should not do this or do that. That could be a second way of looking at it that we could do. But that's the Yoga Sutras. It doesn't also go into much detail of what this mind is. It talks about the soul, it talks about the self, it talks about our path towards this liberation, this liberated state, and the different aspects of samadhi and the things that happen along the way. But there's not much development on that area. And that's the Yoga Sutras. We don't really know also when was it written, but around the 2nd century after of our era, so 2nd century more or less. And as we are moving on, Samkhya, you could say that Samkhya is very much connected to Patanjali, or like Patanjali is kind of like the introduction into what Samkhya will become. And Samkhya takes on the ideas of Patanjali and develops them and creates a really nice like description and maybe even diagram of how now much more clearly how consciousness begins to manifest, or how the unmanifested God begins to manifest into the manifestation that we have right here. And actually, that will be that will be one of the key aspects that is going to differentiate Samkhya from later on Vedanta, which is that Samkhya is going to say, look, there is a consciousness, there is an undefined, unmanifested consciousness, universal consciousness. We will call that God, and that that spirit of consciousness, or that consciousness or spirit. Sometimes you can read it like consciousness or great spirit. That's what we call Purusha. And then as that is manifesting into the creation, that becomes Prakriti. So Purusha has this root, P-U-R, Purusha. And maybe I can start writing a little bit. We will do a diagram. Let me see. If anybody is listening, if you're online, feel free to say hello, say Satnam, greet your fellow yogis and yoginis from the Sangat, and feel free to ask any question and just respond or react in some way to what I am saying. So the two terms that I was referring are Purusha and Prakriti. And if we look at these two terms, the way I like to remember them is that Purusha has P-U-R, which is something pure. So this is referring to the aspect that is like pure consciousness. And sometimes you can read it as a spirit. It's quite interesting. Sometimes if you take these spiritual teachings, when you read the texts from whatever teacher, when they talk about spirit, try substituting the word with consciousness and see if it makes any sense. Yeah. So there is a way that you could say that the spirit is linked to consciousness, or even is synonymous. In a way, the more the spirit is present, the more consciousness is present. So we could say it like that. And Prakriti, I look at Kri, and this is linked to Kar. Like in the Mul Mantra I was exploring in the other course, Ekonkar, Kar is create, Kriti, creation, yeah, with a T, creation. So this is the creation. So this is the consciousness or the spirit of God, we could say, and this is the creation. Now, whether it's the spirit of God or our spirit is the same. It's the same, it's just that we could say that there is a infinite, universal, impersonal aspect to Purusha, and then there is a personal aspect to Purusha, that it is our own personal consciousness that needs to find our way back to the source, find the way back to identifying with this universal consciousness. So while we are in the planet and while we are having this experience that is very much affected by this force called Maya, then while we are in this Maya, we perceive that we are separate from everything, and we are separate from God. So when I say we here, that is that our consciousness has been entangled with the ego-mind complex. You will remember from the introduction of this course that I was talking about this. So as we have been entangled, then our Purusha identifies with what we are perceiving with this mind, with these eyes, which see through the colored glass, the stained glass, and therefore we think that we are separate from everything. Okay. As we are advancing in yoga, the Samkhya and later Vedanta will explore how our individual personal Purusha finds its way back to the source. And this is a very interesting thing, which is that when I'm gonna be developing a diagram here, and when we see the diagram, we're gonna see that it's not only a description of how this universal impersonal consciousness manifests into the creation, but it's also a map for our individual consciousness to go back to the source. So this is how from the source comes down and how us from the bottom can come up. So it's a map of consciousness throughout the meditative process into the meditative state, into the union. Right? So it's really, really nice. You will see, it's very interesting. We have a very interesting diagram ahead of us today, exploring this concept. But this idea that Purusha and Prakriti are separate, I'm not really sure how much the emphasis is that they are separate in Samkhya, but there's definitely a feeling that when you are going into Vedanta, they say, particularly Advaita Vedanta, which means non-dual. Non-dual because there is no two aspects. It means that it's not separate, it's the same, it's all connected, and it's all one. So we're going to move from Samkhya into Vedanta, but I'm going to be starting to draw the diagram that is explored in Samkhya. Only I'm going to change a few things in order to complement it later with Vedanta. So I'm going to do like a modern understanding of the old diagram, let's say. But let's go straight away. So this is the particularly interesting thing that appears in Samkhya as in contrast with the Yoga Sutras, which is, look, we have the one. The one unmanifested consciousness. Yeah, we could call it God. Yeah, G-O-D, generating, organizing, destroying principle. But what is it generating? Well, Prakriti, right? So Purusha is on this level, yeah? And actually, because I'm a numerologist, I'm going to follow the numbers here. And I'm going to be doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to start going down in this diagram. So we are saying, well, what comes after 1? After 1 comes 2. What do you mean? Well, as the one decides to manifest, it manifests into 2 aspects. And these 2 aspects can have many names. One name we could use is Shiva and Shakti. Shiva and Shakti. But you could also see this as the yin yang. Yeah. Yeah. Or you could see it as the masculine principle and the feminine principle, or positive and negative, or yin yang. Yeah, many ways you could describe it. The thing is, 1 becomes 2. So if everything was one, if everything was one unified, undifferentiated consciousness, in order for the manifestation to occur, there has to be more than one things. And the moment that 1 separates into 2, already that polarity, which can become easily duality, happens there. So here we have how the 1 manifests into 2, and you can see this polarity here, but you can also see it like look, there is an above and there is a below. As soon as we start to go down, we are already within Prakriti. So creation has already started. And we're gonna start going down, and 3, and then we're gonna go 4, and then we're gonna go 5. So this is like the first layer. We could say this is the 1, then this is a 2, and then we carry on, and then we go into the 3. So as the polarity, this is the polarity as you go into the 3 aspects. Actually, this is the, okay, let me go by parts. These 3 aspects, I'm gonna write it like this. And we're gonna have tamas, rajas, and sattva. Yeah, these are the gunas. Yes. So, what am I saying with this? What am I saying? Okay, I'm saying that if you look at the world, you can put on the glasses that you choose to put on to see the world in a particular way. And if I put on the glasses of polarity, everything I see is yin and yang. When we see 2 people talking, what they are discussing about could be either yin or could be yang. When we see a meal in front of us that we're going to eat, the food that we're going to eat, you can see it as yin, you can see it as yang. You can look at a project and think about how to develop the project. And that can be a yin aspect, and there could be a yang aspect to the project. But if I change my glasses and I put my 3 eyes glasses, imagine there's another eye here, right? Then I could look at the world through the gunas mirror, the gunas glasses. Then therefore, what I would be looking is that if I'm talking in a relationship and we are discussing something, is the topic that we are discussing a matter of tamas or raja or sattva? Or if I'm looking at food, is the food tamasic, rajasic or sattvic? Or if I'm looking at a project, whatever I'm working on, is there an aspect of tamas or rajas or sattva? So the glasses that I put on is how I'm going to see the world, because those are like qualities, but are more like subtle qualities. It's not that you see raja, but there is rajasic qualities in food. Like, let's say, for example, if you're going to eat some very heavy meal, maybe it has already been pre-cooked and you're just warming it up, it doesn't have much prana and it's going to be quite tamasic. So it's going to, be very heavy on you. You're going to need time to digest and you're going to be feeling slow and maybe even sleepy. Slow and sleepy, yeah? So that would be tamasic. But if you're going to have like a yogi tea with cardamom and pepper and cinnamon, I'm already smiling just thinking of the yogi tea. Those are rajasic qualities, right? So you can look at the food and think, oh, this is tamasic or this is rajasic. This is what I'm saying. Now, when we are looking at this in the Samkhya philosophy, there would be some step here in between, some aspects of the mind, like buddhi, and some other aspects that in Vedanta later on is going to be much more developed. Yeah, this is just like the early stages of understanding what is happening with consciousness, but the mind is not very clear where it is yet. I would say in the Samkhya is not very developed, but when you go into Vedanta, we will find it that is much more strongly developed. And we would say that there is 4 different aspects. Now, whether there is 3 or there is 4, this is like a topic for discussion. We're going to do this on another video. But for now, let us just say, let me do this I'm going to write it like this. 3 and 4, we're going to come into the 4. And we're going to have manas, chitta, ahankar, and buddhi. And these 4 aspects are interrelated in a very, very particular way. This will be the topic for another of the parts of this course, of the mind course. And we're going to go into this in a lot of detail. But for the moment, let's say that in Vedanta, we identify chitta with having some particular function, like memory, which is independent from the others. But it's also at the same time, remember that the word chitta means consciousness. Chit means consciousness. So when we are talking about who we are, our essence is Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat being the truth, Ananda being the bliss, and Chit being the consciousness. So there is an aspect in connection between consciousness and the mind, but as I said, this requires a much deeper understanding, and we will have to deal with this in another video. However, in Samkhya, it is said that chitta encompasses these 3, manas, buddhi, and ahankar. So chitta is like a universal mind, a universal concept which has these 3 within. So whether there are 3 or 4 depends on, it's a matter of perspective. But as I said, I will develop that in another video. However, yeah, we have come to the 4th aspect. Yeah, so now the mind is starting to appear. This is our mind, but there are these texts where it says that we are created as an image of God. So if we have a mind, maybe God has a mind. So maybe that's an interesting way to look at things, yeah? But maybe there is a particular, universal godly aspects of these 4 things which make creation happen. But never mind, never mind. We're going to go into the 5th level, which this is very clearly defined in the Samkhya philosophy. Now, this fifth level would be the 5 elements. I'm going to write them all in a straight line. And it would be the earth. This is a symbol I use for earth. It would be water. Let me do some waves. It would be some fire. These are the 5 elements. Yeah, like a little spark. It would be air. Let me just do like a little wind. Something like that. I did it very small today. And ether. Ether I will do like vibration. Like that. So these are what we call the tattvas. Doesn't matter if you write it with a V or a W, it doesn't matter. Okay, so there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, now let's just ignore this layer for a moment, yeah? Let's say that if you look at this like the gunas or the yin and yang, this is another layer of these glasses that I can put on. So again, if I'm looking at the meal that I have in front of me, I can recognize some elements which are earthly elements. Let's say like food that comes from the earth, like potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, and things like that, and carrots, right? And then there would be watery elements, watery food which has liquid, yeah, and it is liquid form. And then there would be fiery food, like spicy food, for example, and airy food and etheric food. Airy would be like fruit, which grows in the air, things like that. So if I'm looking at food with my gunas glasses, I could identify, remember the pre-cooked food that I'm warming up in the microwave, which I don't use, but okay, let's say you use it, that's tamasic. If you look at a cup of yogi tea, that would be rajasic. Now, you can look at things also from this aspect of tattvas. So if I'm putting my tattvas, then I would be looking at the yogi tea, or I would be looking at the pre-cooked food, or whatever I have in my plate, and I understand what is earth, what is water, what is fire. So this is just on which level am I going to see things. However, we can see earth, we can see water, we can see fire, we can see air, we can hear ether, right? Vibration, let's say. So in a way, what we see here, actually, these tattvas, we could put them like this, like turn them around and put from the ether down to the earth. Because this would be like, if you look at the chakras, the yogi, yeah, we know that the first chakra is associated with the earth, then there's the water, and there's the fire, then there's the air, there's the ether. So we would see that this would be the first 5 chakras. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? And so on the 6th chakra, we would come into this area of the mind. The 6th chakra is very close to the mind, so this is where the mind would be. And going higher, we would go into the 7th chakra. Yeah, remember that the 6th chakra is represented as like a lotus flower with two petals, meaning that when you go beyond the level of the 6th chakra, you are going beyond duality. So you could see how you are actually when you are raising your consciousness through the body, through the chakras, you're raising up. So this is, I'm starting to point out to this aspect that this map is actually, so this diagram is actually a map of consciousness. And as we are raising our energy through the chakras and our awareness, we are going back towards the source. At the end, what do we want? We want to be one with God, one with the one. One with the one is to be the same. Samadhi, right? Samadhi is the same root, same, right? Samadhi. So we are doing this path to go up, then we can look at Patanjali's steps. Then we could follow this path as we are going up with Patanjali. And Patanjali is going to give us clues on how to do this, but let's not jump ahead. Let's not go too quick with this. Okay? Okay, so far so good. If you have any question or you have any comment, please write it in the chat. Or if you are watching this video recorded, then write it in the comments, and I will respond to that when I come to it. So this would be the diagram that would be initiated in Samkhya philosophy. Some things would be changed. This would not be here, but then there's some aspects which are somewhere around here, not very clearly defined. But I think it makes much more sense if we look at it in this way: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then developing it with a deeper understanding from what Vedanta can give us about the mind, and then utilizing the techniques from Yoga Sutras about how to go up. Yeah? All right? So far so good? Hopefully? Okay. So I think this will be the first segment. This is about the, how could we call this? This has a number of names, this diagram. I've seen it called the ladder of consciousness, the ladder of manifestation. No, is that cosmic manifestation? This is the diagram of cosmic manifestation. I've seen it called like that. If you consider that this is how God manifests from Purusha to Prakriti. But I've also seen it called like the ladder of consciousness, because you are going higher with your consciousness. Okay? However, what do you mean going up with the consciousness? Because what is consciousness, right? Now we need to connect this to what we were looking in the other video on these levels of consciousness. But how can we connect these two things? It's not so easy, it's not so direct. And in order to start to explore the connection, we need to listen how particularly Vedanta explores consciousness. So now we have been seeing, as I mentioned, we will be seeing the mind in more detail. But before we go more into the mind, after all, this is called the mind course, not the consciousness course, but we are linking it anyway. But before we go deeper into the mind, the aspects of the mind, let's talk about the more wider aspect of consciousness. So for that, I would like to read a few quotes. Now, when I came into contact with these teachings first, that came from the teachings of Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. So it comes from Yogi Bhajan. Now, there is a number of lectures where he talks about how there is different levels, no, not levels, he calls it states of the mind, but actually he's talking about consciousness. Let me say if I can put it on the screen. This will be the first time I'm sharing a screen from the computer, so be patient with me. Like this. Okay. Whoops, hold on. Okay. So this is a lecture from Yogi Bhajan, and he says, what is a samadhi? Closing your eyes, sitting in Gyan Mudra, you think it's a samadhi. No, it is a practice of a samadhi. It is a concentration, meditation, and trance for the development of the mind. That is what the normal books which you read, they will say, concentrate, meditate, and you will reach the stage of trance. And trance has got certain stages. He's referring to the Yoga Sutras, yeah? Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Particularly, well, more like Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Concentrate, meditate, and you will reach the trance, the stage of this kind of trance has certain stages. He calls it trance, is meaning Samadhi, yeah? But he says, look, mind has got these 4 stages. Jagrat, actually, I have to say, I don't like the way it's written here, but you have to understand Yogi Bhajan had a very strong accent, and it's a lot of service that has been done by a lot of Sevadars translating his lectures, but some of the recordings which were not really high quality, it was difficult to understand. He spoke with an Indian accent, and then the writing ends up a little bit like this. So I'm just gonna read it the way it is. Jagrat Sukupath Turiya. He says these are the 4 stages of the mind. Jagrat is the awakened stage, the conscious stage. Suputh is the dream stage. Sukupath is the projected stage, and Turiya is the universal stage. Look, I found like 3 or 4 different lectures by him, and every lecture has it written slightly different. So I think there is absolutely no doubt that he's referring to the 4 minds that, to these 4 states of consciousness that we can find in Vedanta. But we will read about this a bit more. Look, this is another lecture where he talks about this. But so I wanted to. This is, by the way, this text I wrote this text, so don't worry about it. But okay, so here's the description by Swami Shivananda. Swami Shivananda is an incredible teacher that he retranslated some of the old classic Sanskrit texts, and he had he produced like a revival in yogic understanding, and he created a good number of teachers which ended up going also to the West, but also opening like the Yoga Vihar school, Vihar School of Yoga, this huge library of books that come from that are incredibly rich in wisdom, and then there's a whole revival of this whole thing, and there is also like an opening up into the Westerners and also for everyone. So whatever practice was secret before, it starts to be more open, starting from Shivananda. So he's a really important figure in history, and he approaches it from the perspective of Vedanta. So let's listen to his words regarding these 4 stages. Again, so Jagrat is the waking stage in which man, let me just emphasize it like this, the man enjoys the 5 gross objects of senses or sound through the 5 organs of knowledge, the ear, skin, the eye, tongue, and the nose. Okay, I'll go into this in a moment. He's conscious of the world. So, Jagrat is the waking stage in which we perceive this. What does that mean? Look, do you remember in this diagram we just did? So what that means is that when you go up here, we cannot by ourselves naturally perceive the one God immediately. We cannot just perceive it. Otherwise, we would not have to do this whole journey, right? And we cannot even see the gunas directly. We can understand what are the qualities of the gunas and perceive them in food, for example. But what we can perceive is when we get to this level. So what we see is what is here. These 5 elements, the earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And as I mentioned, even within our physical body, these are the lower 5 chakras. So this is the part that is more connected to ourselves. And these 5 elements are associated to 5 senses. So as we are coming down, this is this God creating the creation, kar, creation, kriti, and down here is where we have our yogi. As usual, very thin and hungry yogi, but never mind. And so, look, these 5 tattvas, this is what we perceive through here. Yeah, 5 tattvas, which we can associate to the 5 chakras. I'm going to put blue, the second one, even though normally I draw it orange, just because it's water today, so I'm going to do it just like blue. But here we have this, and green, and light blue. And every one of these chakras is associated to one of the five senses. So this would be the smell. So how do I do this? I'm going to write it. I'm going to do another 5 like this. I'm going to get in trouble now because I'm going to have to draw all of them. Okay, how do I do this? Smell. This is our nose. Taste. This is our mouth. With our tongue. Like that. Hopefully you can see this is a mouth. Or imagine it. All right. Our eyes. Just a symbol. Touch, I'm going to do a hand. And hearing, let's do an ear. Okay, so we have 5 senses. This is the way we interact with the world. And these 5 senses are associated with the 5 tattvas, and they are associated to the 5 chakras. So, for example, the 3rd chakra, just a very quick example, okay? Being fire, fire produces light. Light allows us to see. So you see a connection of the fire with the quality of vision linked to the element of fire. And you can very easily link these 5, maybe we'll do it some other day, the 5 senses with the 5 chakras, with the 5 elements. So as you are coming down, we cannot perceive this, but as we get here, then these are our 5 elements. This is called the indriyas. And there are 2 aspects. There is the Gyanindriyas, I think it's called, and Karmindriyas. So karma is action, which means this is how, let's say, in a computer would be the input and the output. Yeah, these are the inputs to the computer. The computer would be the brain. So this is how the brain receives the information. So how we perceive the world through these 5 senses. And the action would be the opposite. Coming from the first chakra would be movement, linked to moving. You know, the smell gives us the sense of direction. And direction is to move in the world, in the earth. Taste would be procreation, so the impulse to procreate. And then to see, it would be, what is that? How would that be? Seeing. I forgot what it was. Well, touch would be to grasp things, and hearing would be speaking. So, you know, as we can hear a sound or we can produce a sound. So this is the input or this is the output. We can touch something or we can grab it, and so on. This one has disappeared from my mind right now, but maybe it will come back some other time. So these 5 indriyas, 5 kamindriyas, 5 inputs into our brain, 5 outputs out into the world. This is how we perceive the world and how we act into the world. So this is also going to be, remember, our actions into the world are the things that create karma. So what goes in and out through these 5 senses is going to be very much linked to our karma. Maybe that's why it's called karmindriya. The indriyas of actions, the senses of actions, but also the senses which can create karma. So we have to be careful with what comes in and out of these holes, because sometimes we call them associated to the holes as well. You see, there is this funny thing that Yogic used to say. This is the Healthy, Happy, Holy organization. He said, no, we are all holy because we have 9 holes. He would say that. We just need to get healthy and be holy, be happy. So he was just making a joke because these holes are like, you know, the nostrils, the eyes, the ears, the mouth, and then the sexual organs and excretion. So how we relate to the world through these holes is how we often get in trouble. So maybe by the things that we say, or what we look, or what we hear, or what we say, or what we eat, things like that. These are the ways that we generate karma, the ways that we get into trouble. So If we go back to the Patanjali talking about the yamas and the niyamas, isn't it 5 yamas and 5 niyamas? Is it a coincidence? I don't think so. All right. So there is 5 aspects telling us how to be careful with these 5 senses, with these 5 senses of action, senses of perception, and the 5 tattvas. So it's all 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. And this is the realm where we can perceive things. If we want to go higher, that's when our consciousness has to be more refined. And in order to be more refined, we have to get away from these 5 senses of perception. That is the step that Patanjali talks about pratyahara. When he talks about pratyahara, it's like pulling away from the senses. Why? Because the senses are what pulls us out of ourselves. Ourselves, God within, is not in what we perceive through the senses, is within. So we have to bring the senses inwards and synchronize to the inner self within us. So that's the pratyahara step before we go into meditation. It's telling us, be careful with what's happening through the senses. You may remember the metaphor I used when we were talking about the Bhagavad Gita of Krishna driving the horses being the senses, and Krishna should be our buddhi, our more awakened consciousness, but generally we let the ego take the control of the horses, and that's when we get into trouble. So if you let the ego be in control of these 5 senses of action and senses of perception, that's when we get into trouble. So hopefully things are starting to make sense. So this all came from here. Again, Jagrati is the waking state in which man enjoys the 5 gross objects of senses as sound, etc., through the 5 organs of knowledge, like the ear, the skin, the eye, the tongue, and the nose. So this is the conscious of the world. But however, when he talks about conscious of the world, I would suggest that this is not fully conscious necessarily. It can be fully conscious, but it can also be semi-conscious, because we can be driving a car, we can be in our boat, driving our boat, and be thinking about something else. So we are perceiving through the semi-conscious state, but we are kind of dreaming in our mind some other things. But okay, so Jagrati is kind of connecting consciousness and semi-consciousness. Let's go back to the Shivananda's talk. Let's go to Sopana now. And here I would say this is the right way to write it. It could be that up here when we were reading Yogi Bhajan, he could also be, what is it? Suputh is Sopana. It could be that there is a variation in the way it's pronounced in the north of India. I don't know. But this is definitely a term for the classical term to talk about this. Again, this is Vedanta. Sopana is the dreaming state in which man enjoys the 5 objects of sense through vasanas or impressions created in his waking state. So as we are awake, whatever have we received through the 5 senses creates an impression within. And then the body and all the senses are at rest, but the mind alone is working. And the mind itself is the subject and the object. It creates all the dream pictures. So what he's saying is that we are coming here. And if you remember, the subconscious was the area of the mind that it's at play when we are dreaming. So when we are dreaming, remember, when we are awake, something happens and then I throw something goes deep into my subconscious, like maybe garbage, maybe something else, but it could be garbage. And then during the dreams, this is what manifests. So this is what we are dreaming about. So this is a state of subconscious. What Vedanta calls swapana is linked to subconscious. Okay, I hope that's quite clear. That's quite direct. Let's go on. Now there is the next. In the deep state of sushupti, all the senses and the mind are at rest. The mind is involved into its cause, but there is a veil between the jiva and Brahman. Jiva being the soul, and Brahman being God. So there is a veil. So as we go deep, still there is a veil that we cannot see see God. But this is the deep sleep, or in this diagram would be the unconscious. So this would be the deepest layers within us. Okay, let me get another diagram. 1 second, I didn't plan to look at this one. I want to get the diagram of that video that I did on the self. If you have watched that video, if you haven't, I recommend you watch that one to know what I'm talking about. But in that video, I was reflecting upon the different aspects of self. Sometimes we hear about the higher self, sometimes we hear about the hidden self, or we talk about the false self or the real self. What are all these selves? And I'm just gonna share the diagram. I'm not gonna explain it, but if you didn't watch that video, then I recommend that you watch that one. Satnam Willie, sorry, I just saw your message now. I don't know how long have you been watching, but hello Willie, and welcome to the stream. I'm glad you're here. So this is I'm just gonna share the diagram, and then I just want to point out one thing. In this diagram, it's a lot of stuff. If you haven't watched, better watch the video. But if you watch the video, I just wanted to point one thing. Look, this is consciousness going deeper, yeah? And there is even, like when they say, when you fall asleep, the head falls down, because we come out of our mind and deep into ourself. So as we are going down into ourself, this would be our real self. And this is the only thing is we connect to this when we go to sleep. So normally we are not conscious of it, which means we are unconscious, right? Unconscious, right? We are unconscious, we are not conscious of the real self. But even if we were going deeper into the unconscious, deeper into this place, there is a veil between the real self and the great unknown. The great unknown is God. What here Shivananda is calling Brahman. Yeah? He says, there is a veil between the Jiva and Brahman. And when he says Jiva, I'm making a jump and saying that that's the self, that's the real self, the soul. If we can associate it to something, if it's residing somewhere, that's linked to our self, a real self, and there is a veil between that and Brahman. But there is a fourth state. Now the fourth state transcends, let me read this. The fourth state transcends the above three states. The sage who has controlled the mind and the senses, who is above body consciousness and the three gunas, there is a misspelling here, means tamas, rajas and sattva, who is identifying himself with the sat, chit, ananda. Brahman is in the enjoyment of this blissful or superconscious state. This is the transcendental state of moksha, or final beatitude. Oh my goodness, there's so much in this paragraph, yeah? There is a lot. Let me break it down slowly. So, first, this is the fourth state. It literally means fourth state. Turiya means fourth. So this is literally meaning fourth state. But as he is very interesting, because he is saying, look, there's Jagrat, there's Sapana, there's Shushupti, and then there is Turiya. And when he says there is Turiya, he calls it, how did he call it? A super conscious state. Now that will be transcendental state, yeah? Transcendental, super conscious. You will be familiar with that because we talked about that one here. So I find it fascinating that it's going down, 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 and you get to the top. Semi-conscious to subconscious to unconscious, and actually you can go to the highest place of Turiya. I'm thinking whether we will explore Turiya in another video more in detail, because it's a fascinating aspect. But just very, very, touching it just very softly, let's say this fourth state of Turiya is beyond. I would say, let me just do it like this. Imagine that this is like the first state the second, and this would be the third, right? And the fourth state is kind of like up here. So he's saying, look, there is Jagrat, there is Swapana, there is Sushupti, but then this is Turiya. Turiya is beyond these three. It's not like there is layers and this is below. This is the lowest one. But it's actually like kind of transcending both, transcending the three of them, yeah? But I've seen descriptions of Turiya also like if during the waking life we are semi-conscious or conscious, during the dreaming we are subconscious, during the sleep we are unconscious, Turiya is in contact with the unconscious, but at the same time fully conscious. So it's like dreaming and awake at the same time. Sorry, not dreaming and awake. Sleep and awake at the same time. It's not dreaming because that would be something else, like lucid dreaming. I talk about it in another video, the lucid dreaming concept. But this would be like kind of sleep and awake at the same time. It's kind of very paradoxical and very difficult to imagine when you are not there. And so that's the only way that, you know, we can find descriptions on how to explain that, because it's how to explain something that is beyond the realm of the mind in a way that the mind can understand. It's just, we use metaphors, we use drawings, we use symbols so that we can relate to that, but it's not easy to connect it. Yeah. Let me know if you are understanding this or how you're relating to this. Yeah. If you are online right now, Satnam, and I am grateful that you are here, and I would be happy if you interact with me. Yeah. I'm here for you, so if you need to clarify something, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep on talking. Yeah. So if you read this description from Shivananda, you will already identify something. Look, these are four, and so, but there is many more stages. Actually, Shivananda himself also in other lectures, he talks about there are other stages. Let me see. No, that's not here. Sorry about this. Blah, 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 blah. Don't even worry about this. Here. He called another state is swoon. He says, in swoon there is half of deep sleep as it is different from the other three states. A man in a swoon does not perceive any object. The body of a swooning person falls down on the ground, and so he's not awake, but he's not dreaming, and he's totally unconscious. Is he dead? No. He's alive, but he has a life and warmth. So this is like when somebody swoon is caused by a blow on the head with a stick or some such causes. While sleep is due to weariness or fatigue, swoon is only half sleep. It's not fully asleep. So he's telling us, look, don't just stay with these four. There are other stages. There are other states, and there are also intermediate states, yeah, some being in between one and another. Swoon was one good example, but lucid dreaming that I just mentioned is another good example, because that would be living in the realm of the subconscious, but being conscious, being aware, being awake at the same time. So what state is that? That would be, how would we call that? Swapana Jagrat? That would be, we wouldn't know how to say it, right? By the way, we can add here the Sanskrit names to this diagram now. I think that would be a good thing to add. So let me just do this. So Jagrat would be here in between these two. Between conscious and semi-conscious. I used pink for the subconscious, would be the Swapana. Oh, I'm writing in capitals, wait. Swapana. Sorry for my pronunciation. I'm probably mispronouncing some of these words, but never mind. This would be Sushupti. Right? And then we would have up here, we would have Turiya. But another interesting thing is, do you remember when I mentioned that this is like ta 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 tam? Why are we going down, 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 and up? How interesting that as we go into the unconscious, there is a way to transcend into the superconscious. I was just thinking now, if you read a Western approach to states of consciousness, you can read Carl Jung talking about the consciousness, and he talks about the subconscious and the unconscious, and he says there is such a thing as the collective unconscious. So on an unconscious level, we are all connected in some archetypal way. So through the unconscious, you can find the connection to all of us, to everyone. Now, connection to everyone is equivalent to saying that ekonkar, like we are all one. And in a way, when I was saying this is the path towards samadhi, towards being one with God, it's not only with God, it's being one with everyone. So if you go to this level, you realize that we are all connected, but also when we are looking into levels of consciousness, there is a level of the unconscious which knows that we are all connected. So this unconscious, the collective unconscious from Carl Jung, would be making reference to this aspect that there is something deeper within. And somehow it's like, if this is asleep, it's like saying, look, there is a deep part of you that is deep asleep. And in that part of you, you know that you are one with everyone. So that part is the one that you have to wake up to. So you have to be aware of that aspect, which generally we are not, because when we are getting into contact with this, we fall asleep. And look, very interesting, another very interesting thing. This, I believe, this is very much the reason why many times when we are meditating, we are falling asleep. Has that happened to you? Like you start the timer, you get your timer, and then you put 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you want to meditate, and then you set it on the clock, and you were perfectly rested, you slept well, you were fine, you even maybe had a green tea, whatever, or coffee, whatever you want, right? I don't have coffee, but whatever. You are fully awake. You start to meditate, and your head is like dropping, like it's a constant battle with sleep. And you are like falling asleep. And then as soon as the timer beeps, beep, 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 20 minutes are gone, I finished then, you are perfectly awake, you are not sleepy, you are fine, there was no problem. Anytime you put the timer again, you're sleepy. What is that? Well, I mean, sometimes it's just you are sleepy, right? But I think many times what's happening is that we are contacting a part of us which is asleep, a part of us that is the real self. Remember this diagram that I was sharing today from the other time, yeah? We are going down, like the head going down, yeah? We are contacting this. But the problem is, we generally, when we go to sleep and we dream, even beyond dream, when we are fully asleep, is when we are resting in the self and we recuperate, and then we come back the next day with energy for another day. But because when we do that, we fall asleep. Now, when we are awake and we try to get in contact with this real self, the experience is similar, and the only feeling that we recognize is similar to falling asleep. So the feeling is, I'm falling asleep. Well, what is happening is that your mind is falling asleep, and hopefully you put your mind asleep and you awake in consciousness. But that's not always easy to do, right? You are going to sleep, and then it's like, am I touching something very deep? Is it happening? Is it not happening? And then you are half asleep, but then something is waking up, yeah? Willie says, a separate in-depth video about Turiya, true self, would be great. If there is a time, it's always a bliss to learn from you. Wahiru, yes, I think we need it. I think we need it, but I'm going to need to do more research on that, and I'm going to prepare that for a future video, because I'm planning to do more in-depth videos on the 4 aspects of the mind, the manas, ahankar, buddhi, chitta, and I would like to do some in-depth video also on Turiya. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Yeah, and but yes, so Turiya, this fourth state of consciousness that would be beyond the fully asleep. You are awake, but you are in the sleep at the same time. Yeah, that's a paradox, but that's the thing. Look, these four stages that sorry, it wasn't this one. These four stages that Shivananda was talking about, Jagrat, Swapana, Sushupti, Turiya. He said it, these are not the only ones. There is other stages. And if we are looking at lucid dreaming, that would be within the subconscious, but awake. If we look at the semi-conscious, this, I am awake, but I'm kind of dreaming because my brain is driving the car through the traffic, but I'm thinking about something else. I'm actually having a little dream during the wakeful hours, right? So that's why when I started, I explored from the Western perspective, and I said it makes much more sense if we can find the clarity with these 5 stages. It's going to make it more clear. However, the 5th one, being Turiya, we would have to see it in the same way that I put before the 3 cups of the 3, when I did this, and I lifted the 4th one. The 5th one, Turiya, you could also see it in the same way. You could put conscious, subconscious, unconscious, and then lifting it up to find the superconscious. Yeah, you could do, I don't know if I want to do it here. Let me just do this. This is a diagram that we use a lot in Karam Kriya. I'm going to do another course on numbers very soon, next year. So be ready for that. I'm going to start working on numbers because this is going to bring a lot of clarity. But let's say this is the unconscious. This is the subconscious. This is the semi-conscious. And this is the conscious. And this is superconscious or consciously conscious. So we will see this would be the 5 stages. Yeah, it would be the one. We drew it with blue because of the water. We put the 2. Let's see. The 3 was yellow. The 4th was green. Look, I'm adding more diagrams, but hopefully this is not to complicate more things, but actually to find more clarity, yeah? So you see, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, but the 5 in the same way like we did before with these 4 thingies, right? Now here, sorry, like that. Let me do it properly, okay. Now, consciously conscious would be like this, right? Imagine a pyramid, and these are the 4 corners, and you are pulling away from the center. So the center point, the consciously conscious, would be going beyond all these states. Yeah? And then you can be operating in the world, but you are fully conscious. The mind can be asleep, but you are conscious. You could be dreaming, but you are conscious. And it's not lucid dreaming, it's even beyond that. Beyond the state of lucid dreaming. However, lucid dreaming is a good example of how, as we are opening our consciousness, developing our consciousness, we start to bring it down in a way, to make it seep down. It's like bringing our consciousness down here. This happens also through meditation, by the way. When we close our eyes and we start meditating, and this, the semi-conscious becomes calmer. We will talk about this in the when we talk about the Yoga Sutras. But when he said Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Chitta Vritti Nirodha is like the waves. When these waves get calmer, then consciousness sees deeper. This is in this I was talking about how you can use this net and get the rubbish out. Yeah, when you're meditating, you are diving into the subconscious, and that's when some nasty thoughts may come up. That's why sometimes you wake up early, you go to meditate, and then the worst thoughts of the whole day come during that time. And sometimes you feel like, why do I even meditate? That I have horrible thoughts when I meditate. That's a good sign. That means that you are being aware of what's there in the subconscious. Normally we wouldn't see it, and then it would be affecting us without seeing it. Remember, this is the bubble, like the fish is throwing a bubble, and then we have a thought, and we don't know where that thought is coming from. Well, by meditating and going deeper into that aspect, then we can see the nasty thought and get rid of that consciously, awake. So you see, that's meditating is kind of going deeper. And when you can go deeper and deeper and deeper, that would be like seeing the unconscious. And if you can merge the one that is up here with what is down here, that would be when you jump to Turiya. I hope that gets more clear. And again, Turiya will require a video by itself, but I think it's a nice idea, a nice metaphor that when because when the sea is not calm, Chitta-vritti, when these Chitta-vrittis are moving, yeah, Chitta-vritti Nirodha, that's the first line of the Yoga Sutras, by the way, if you don't know. I'm making reference to this line, the second line. Atta yoga nushasanam yogas Chitta-vritti Nirodha. So yoga is Chitta-vritti, when these movements of the Chitta, Nirodha is like cessate, stop. So when these movements of consciousness, remember, this is consciousness. When the movements stop, when the sea is calm, the water, two things happen. You can see yourself reflected into the water, and if the water is clean enough, so if the subconscious is clean enough, you can see beyond to the depth. So when the mind is calm, the consciousness is aware of itself, consciously conscious, C square, and you see the deepest part of your unconscious. So that would be linking the part that is in deep sleep with the part that is awake. I'm talking the part that we are not conscious of, which is the self. And when you do that, you are becoming aware of this self. And as you are becoming aware of the self, this veil that is here has a chance to lift. You know, this concept of lifting the veil, and the veil, sorry, not the whale. I'm thinking of the sea. Lifting the whale, that would be very heavy. Yes, what are you doing, Ardaas? I'm meditating. So what kind of meditation? I'm lifting the whale. That would be. Okay, I'm gonna do a video on lifting the whale meditation. That's gonna be a powerful one. You will see. We're gonna do it. Okay, so this concept, lifting the veil, is well known. Yeah, when the separation between the real self and the Atman, and what Shivananda was talking, the separation between the Jiva and Brahma, yeah, when it's lifted. And then you are one. You are one with the one. Which one? This one. There is only one. So that's the path towards the one. And that's it. That's the end of the road. That's the end of the journey. That's when you get to that state of union, yeah, Turiya. I'm thinking I'm going to have to do another video exploring the differences between Turiya and enlightenment and liberation and Jivan Mukta and what else? Moksha, Nirvana, Samadhi. There's all these terms which can be quite confusing. And what's the difference? Sometimes it's very subtle, the difference. Sometimes they are synonymous. But I think it would be nice to explore it. And we will do that some other time. I am putting a lot of homework on myself, many videos to do. But yeah, I'm very passionate about this, as you can tell, probably. And hopefully I'm helping to find more clarity with these aspects of what consciousness is, what mind is, what ego is. And today was a lot about exploring the different understanding of consciousness coming from well, we explore a little bit about, the Gita and the Yoga Sutras, but specifically this map that we started to build from Samkhya philosophy, and talking about how it is a diagram of the cosmic manifestation, but it's actually a map of consciousness, of how we can raise our consciousness up towards the one. And this in Vedanta is there is another aspect more in detail, sorry, not these ones, but about how there is 4 levels. I didn't write it actually. These 4 levels of the states of consciousness according to Vedanta, and how that can be very easily connected to this diagram that we already did, the 5 levels of consciousness. I have the other video in this course. Out of these 5 levels of consciousness, we have one video that I explored on the 3 negative, positive, and neutral. This is called the 3 personal minds according to Yogi Bhajan. And then now we're going to be ready to explore the 4 aspects of mind. These are the impersonal minds. Those are the personal, negative, positive, neutral. This is the impersonal according to Vedanta again. So we're going to go back to Vedanta and maybe talk a little bit the difference between Vedanta and Samkhya with the mind. We're going to explore this in a lot of depth. Another day. Today has been a long day. It's been a lot right now. But this is what's coming in front of us, ahead of us. And we will talk also, we have ahead of us also the cycle of what happens in us when we are thinking. How a thought becomes emotions and feelings, and then what do we do with those things, and how that can end up creating karma, or we can live it in a dharmic way. So dharmic and karmic expressions of what happens within us when we have a thought. We're going to explore that also in this course. This is coming in front of us, and somebody was suggesting as well to explore what does artificial intelligence and the new ChatGPT and all that. How is that going to affect us, or if it does, how does it affect us? So we're going to explore that. But maybe while I'm here, maybe just say today I did a search with the ChatGPT. I was asking, draw me a diagram on how Samkhya thinks about the 25 tattvas, because it's not just 5 tattvas. I explored these 5 tattvas: earth, water, fire, air, ether. But there's actually more. Samkhya talks about 25. I've seen other books and teachings which talk about 40. There is many subtle ones. Only the 5, the lowest ones, are the ones we can perceive. Earth, water, and so on. So those 5 are the lowest of the 40 or 25 tattvas. So according to Samkhya, there is a lot of tattvas, and I ask, okay, ChatGPT, can you please draw me? I say please. It's good to be polite with the computers. They work better. And then he did an incredible drawing. I would love to show you. I don't know. Well, let me. No, I cannot. Can I? Can I show it like this? I don't think I can. Some other time. Anyway, Max, could you make a video about self-investigation according to Ramana Maharshi and what's happening with the reflected consciousness when sinking deep into the self? Is that the shift of consciousness? Yes, great. Ramana Maharshi is all about this, about going, he talks about self-inquiry, right? Self-inquiry means going to this diagram and asking yourself, I'm thinking something, what is the source of this thought? And if you try to find the source of thoughts, what you find is that actually thoughts are very ephemeral. They come and they go. They are like smoke. They are not really real because they come from this false aspect of us. And then, but every thought that you think, or let's say every thought that we are aware that we are thinking, behind is the awareness that we are aware of that thought. So as you go to the source of that thought, you are actually going to the source of the awareness that is perceiving that thought, if it makes any sense. So you are actually, in fact, going to the self. In a way, it would be like here. like being here on the boat and saying, look at this wave. This wave is a thought, yeah? Look at the wave. Where is the source of this wave? And by looking at the wave, by observing it, it already starts to calm down and is relaxing. And the way the wave is relaxing, you are doing two things. Like you are saying, is reflected, yeah, the reflected consciousness. So you are perceiving that you are consciousness, you are seeing the consciousness, but also you are, like you are saying, sinking deep. Where? Deep into the self. So yes, that's the shift of consciousness. And when you go, I love this practice, yeah, from the perspective of self-inquiry, the way Ramana Maharshi would teach it, the way Muji also teaches in his lectures and his satsangats. So it's like, I am aware, I am awake, I am seeing things, and my mind is active. But if I step back, and I can look at the mind like the mind is happening somewhere here, what is happening behind? Okay, let's try this. Let's try it. Let's try it right now. Why make another video when we can do it right now? Let's do this experiment. If you can, close your eyes. Again, careful if you're driving or something dangerous, don't do it. But if you can, close your eyes. And a good way to come out of the mind is to be aware of the body. Just feel where you are. If you are sitting, feel the contact of your body with the chair or whatever you are sitting on. If you are standing, feel the weight on your feet. If you are laying down, feel the body pressed against the ground. Feel the effect of the gravity on your body. By being aware of the body, it's a great way to stop paying so much attention to the mind, but staying conscious. So the mind is calming down, the waves are slowing down, but you stay conscious. Now the body is something very gross. Something a little bit less gross, more subtle is the breath. So be aware of the breath now. And breath is consciousness. As you breathe more, you become more aware of the breath. The breath is bringing more awareness. It's kind of like a double thing happening. So be aware of the breath. And normally we look at the world from behind our eyes, from inside the head. That would be the mind looking out. But imagine that you can step back. Let the mind be in front of you. And then specifically with the exhale, allow yourself to fall down. It's a little bit like swallowing yourself. The feeling is a little bit like falling. So you feel like you are falling into the heart. And the heart is a very large space. And every now and then a thought may come, but you see it as a bubble happening in front of you, just floating by. That's all right. Don't fight it. Just notice that it's outside of who you are. The fact that you can perceive the bubble just means that you are not that bubble, you are outside of that bubble. Let it float by. and you keep sinking deep. Utilizing the metaphor of the whale that came out before, it's like you are a whale floating in consciousness. And a little thought may come, like a little fish comes to visit the whale, to just see the fish, but then you let it pass. Don't fight with the fish, don't fight with the mind. Just stay in that consciousness of just being. The breath will naturally slow down, but continue being aware of it as you keep falling. And as you are sinking deep, you will come into recognizing the feeling that you exist. I am here, I exist. And notice how it's different from any thought. It's not even connected to any thought. It's this little whale in the infinite ocean of consciousness, floating by, just feeling, I am, I exist. And maybe the veil doesn't lift. Maybe you don't notice God yet. Maybe. But clearly you exist. I exist in this space. That I is the self. And the feeling of being in that I is both peaceful and joyful. I exist. Inhale. And exhale. Inhale deep. And exhale. One more time. Inhale. And exhale. And you can open your eyes. Welcome back. Has something changed? Maybe what changed is that we are aware of the part of us that does not change, right? Because what is truth? Truth is that thing which doesn't change. we continue. We were here before, we will be here again, we will come back to this little planet, probably. But we have been here so many times, and that part of us which has been and continues to be, that one continues. Max, thank you for the question. Let me do a little diagram of what happened, okay? Because you asked for a different video, and instead I gave it to you right now. But I think, what better moment than the present, right? So here. It will be connected to this aspect, this diagram. Let me put it here next to it. Let me do it. How can I do it? Like this. Yeah. We don't really know where the soul is. Thank you, Sex Max, but here is still the I that wants to dissolve. Yes. Okay, hold on, Hold on a second. We don't really know where the soul is, but if there was some place where it was, it would be in the heart, yeah? And let's say this is our self, our real self, the soul, whatever you want this as to be. But this is like the seat of consciousness. And our consciousness is looking up. And here we have a mind, and the mind is like a mirror. Here we could take the manas, ahankar, buddhi, chitta thing. We will talk about this some other day. But then, let's say your consciousness is being trapped by the mind, which is focused out into the world through the five senses, the indriyas. Yeah, and we get lost here. Yeah, and when we are meditating, and what we just did right now is like sort of like turning this around. Let me do another one. So this is like turning. And now the consciousness, it's reflected back, and now we are perceiving this as. So it's like what I mentioned about swallowing ourselves is like going down. So instead of putting our awareness out through the five senses, it's like going inwards. This is like reflecting back, yeah? So you can use the mind to help you do that. The mind can help. When you ask the mind to repeat a mantra, or when you ask the mind to be paying attention to something, look, you just used your mind to listen to my words and understand the message that I was saying in order to do the exercise. So the mind was actually helping, but instead of looking out, looking in to get back to the self, which doesn't mean that the veil has been lifted. Yeah, you can be here and still not feel united with. So what you are saying about dissolving, yeah, here is still the I that wants to dissolve. Let's rather than dissolve, let's say, yeah, one thing has to dissolve, one thing has to merge. The I that has to dissolve, that's the ego, that's the false I, that's the little I. Yeah, you could say this is the little I. The real self, this is the big I. This is the one that needs to merge. The ego will dissolve, and the real self is merging. Because it's like when you're hearing this concept of I'm a drop of water in the ocean, yeah? But if you're really a drop of water in the ocean, you would disappear. How can you continue and say you are a drop of water in the ocean? There is a merging, but there is a crystallization in that merging. So the self is crystallized enough to survive that merging. I'm not going to go deeper into that. That's another topic for another day, maybe. But let me just say that aspect of the self is not dissolving. That is merging through the ocean, through the ocean. And when the spirit has crystallized enough, when the soul is potent enough, then that little drop of water returning to the ocean doesn't just disappear and dissolve, but it's like a little ice cube floating in the ocean, right? Our whale is like a little ice cube floating in the ocean. It's still water, but it can say, I am one with one. I am one with the one. It can still say that, right? The spirit has been individualized. You will remember when we saw this diagram, when I did this video, I was talking about the individualization of the soul. This is what Carl Jung was using this term, the individualization of the soul. That would be when it's really crystallization from the soul. That's when the little ice cube can float in the ocean and say, I am one with the one. Otherwise, you just dissolve. And I believe there is accounts of meditators going into the great void, like Buddhists call it the great void, going into silence in a vipassana retreat or whatever, and you go so deep. It's like dissolving your identity, because you are negating so many things, and maybe you can end up dissolving completely. So the ego dissolves, but the self remains, and the self is crystallized. This is self-knowledge. This is when you get to the self-knowledge aspect that Ramana Maharshi was referring to. Hopefully that it's more clear. But I think this little diagram helps as well. When we are meditating, can we do this? This is pratyahara, by the way. This is the process of pratyahara. Can we go inwards? And when we go into the Yoga Sutras, we will explore more these different aspects, but I don't want to pile in even more stuff. I think it was quite good today. We did a lot of progress. Hopefully you feel like that. And yes, millions of videos that could be there in YouTube for you to explore, but you chose to be here with me, with us. And especially those of you who are here right now listening and watching, and everyone who watches the recorded videos and you reach to this point, it means you reach the whole end of the video. If so, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you can subscribe. If you don't want to miss these videos, just click on the bell so that when I put a new video, you receive a notification, or when I send a message, when am I going to be online, then you receive a notification. In any case, I'll be back tomorrow again for more live streaming. I will not go into the mind course. I do one of these big, deep videos like today. Well, how long? Almost 2 hours. One of these per week is enough. So I will do tomorrow streaming, and then I will not do another one until after Christmas, but before New Year. So we will have some nice holidays. If you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas for you. If you don't, then if you have holidays, then happy holidays. Willie says thank you, everyone. Thanks for everyone for being here, and until next time, Sanam.